Alright, you might have noticed that I've done a bit of redecorating. Um, and it's funny though, this video is going to be about bullying, and I will get to that. That is relevant to it, but I probably won't get to that until the end of the video. But yeah, I wanted to talk about bullying because I think it's a very important topic in terms of mental health. And it tends to not get a lot of attention because there's this view that bullying is something that's restricted to like schoolyard politics or kids bully. It's not a big deal in the adult world. Um, but I mean, I see bullying an awful lot in romantic relationships, and I see it an awful lot in the workplace, and and yeah, recently I've seen it very much in the media, and so I'd really like to talk about bullying, and I'd like to try to expand people's ideas of what impact bullying has, as well as be more clear on what bullying is. And so, with all these things, we'll start off with definitions and the definition of bullying. Now, the clue is usually in the word bullying, bull. What do bulls do? They compete with each other, they knock their heads, they wrestle with their horns, and they do this to establish a dominance hierarchy. Decide, or who it's a mating hierarchy. Who gets to mate depends on which bull is the most aggressive and can beat the other ones down into submission. And this is called intraspecies competition, where members of the same species beat each other up. And When we use bullying, though, I feel that people use it a bit broadly, so I'm going to actually narrow down my definition, because a lot of people use the word bullying to mean just any kind of coercion. And it's coercion to get what you want. So what you want is usually something external, like some money. It could be lunch money or a pay rise, or you want someone to do something for you. But I think that should be considered something else. I'm not saying that isn't a problem, but that should be a separate issue, because those things, when that bullying and that coercion for something external, it it can be problematic because some people can then start justifying it and say, look, it has a practical function that you can get things done that you need, or get things that you need, and it may even be self-defense that you have to, like, they can turn self-defense and standing up for yourself, twist that around to say that's bullying, and they can kind of make a virtue out of something that's not virtuous at all. And so for my definition of bullying, I'm going to say it's not driven by external needs. So it's not driven because you're starving or hungry or you're being mistreated or anything like that and you're fighting back. No, it's entirely motivated by an internal drive and lack of dopamine production, but in simpler terms, a lack of sense that you have personal significance or value in the world, that your life has value or meaning. And that you compensate for this belief that you lack value, like dopamine, if you want to get technical, by beating other people down so that you can feel, well, look, I'm superior to that person that I beat down. And I think that fits nicely with the root of the word, with bullying, with referring to those bulls who are beating each other up, is that they are trying to humiliate the smaller bulls so that they lose confidence, so they won't try to attract the female bulls or try to mate with them. And they want to build up their own confidence by beating up the weaker bulls, that they are the ones who should have it. So I think it is this really internal thing. Now, obviously, human beings aren't bulls, and we don't do those things, or at least not in most countries. I don't know what happens in other parts of the world. Maybe they do have some kind of mechanism. I definitely know in the past, in some primitive societies that have something like that, where the men would compete for the right. That's a terrible word to use, that the right to abuse the women. So what causes bullying? Well, on the neurological level, it's a lack of dopamine, and lack of dopamine, when you don't have enough of this neurotransmitter in the brain, you feel a lack of motivation. You don't really feel resilient. You're actually quite fragile, and you tend to start having these negative beliefs about yourself, that you're lazy or you're stupid or you don't have talents or values to the world. And some kids have figured out, well, adults as well, figured out that if they pick on other people, they can kind of boost their level by saying, look, at least I'm better than that person. Look, that person's worse off than me. I'm better than them. I'm a better person. And this gives them a big mood boost to do this. And the interesting thing, though, is that it's not random. Like, it's not, everyone just turns into a bully. Bullies seem to come from a particular family background where their parents neglected them or didn't pay as much attention or bullied them. And so you don't actually tend to see bullies that have like, oh yeah, my parents spent a lot of time with me, they cared about me, and I really loved them, they loved me, and had a really great, loving, warm family life. You don't tend to see that from the bully. You tend to be like, oh yeah, my parents didn't really spend much time with me, and I never got anything, and I was always fighting with my siblings and so on like that, competing for attention, and they always said I was stupid or lazy. That's what I typically hear from bullies, and so it is an important point to remember that bullies themselves are often not happy people who've had a really tough time. They've really struggled, and they lack, or they need some compassion and self-healing. It's not something that a happy person tends to do. Happy people who feel confident in themselves generally don't bully, and they're appalled by the idea of bullying. And interesting enough, the people that the bullies pick on are not random either. In fact, the people that the bullies pick on are very similar to bullies themselves in that they also had the same kind of pattern of a dysfunctional home or neglect in their childhood, particularly from their parents. And so what you have with bullying is that you usually have one group of neglected, abused children attacking another group of neglected and abused children. It's very sad. It's very sad, very tragic. And yeah, not random at all. Now, the typical victim of a bully is someone who's plagued with beliefs about themselves that they aren't very attractive, they're not strong, they're not smart, they think they're dull and not really important, and they don't really matter. And the bully is attracted to people with those beliefs because they reinforce what the bully wants to believe, that they're better than that person. If they picked on someone who didn't have these doubts, it wouldn't work. They'd just be like, yeah, you're a bit weird. Why are you telling me I'm stupid? I'm not stupid. And the bully would get no satisfaction from that person. In fact, they'd feel worse because it just reinforced to the bully their own beliefs, their worries, their anxieties, that they themselves aren't that good. They aren't that important. So yeah, and I should point out that I actually had quite an experience, personal experience of being bullied. And it actually started when I went to school. Now, in Australia, you typically start school at age 5 and you turn 6 in your first year of schooling. Now, I was age 4 and I turned 5 immediately after school started. And that's kind of how I started school earlier than the other kids. And that age difference isn't a big deal when you're in your 20s, 30s. I mean, it doesn't matter after that point. But when you're that young, what it meant is that I was significantly smaller, slower, weaker, and less intellectually developed, like dumber basically, than the other kids. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand these concepts of maturity and age difference and so on. I went to the conclusion that I was just dumb, that I was weak and that I was small, and that was just me. That was who I was. And as such, I became basically the ideal person for a bully to attack, because I had the beliefs that made me incredibly vulnerable to being bullied. And so bullies could get a lot of satisfaction in attacking me, because I would give them the satisfaction that they want, because it just seems self-evident. Because those bullies themselves didn't understand the difference in the age and the developmental things themselves, because, like, spoiler, I grew up to be a lot taller and smarter than they were, so, it's funny how things can turn around when you're older. And yes, and I think I'm a lot more confident and happy with myself than those bullies are these days. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've got some idea about some of them. Anyway, so how do I feel about bullying and its impact is that I really do think that bullying is something that came from the jungle, and that's where it should stay. It does no place in a civilized society, because one of the great things about civilization is that we don't need to have this really violent, aggressive way of establishing a social hierarchy. In fact, we have so many different social I should do a video about hierarchy. But anyway, so we have so many different hierarchies that to compete on, whereas in the jungle, the only way you can compete might be hunting and beating other people up. That's the only way you can compete. So only those people, there's only one hierarchy, and there's winners and losers, and if you're no good at hunting or beating people up, you're kind of gone. But in our society, like, you can be awful at fighting, but you can be a really good musician, and that puts you really high in the hierarchy. Or you can be a really good scientist, and that puts you up in that hierarchy. And there's so many options for you to compete that no one misses out. Like, in a civilized society, no one has to miss out. We can all feel good about ourselves. We can all feel that we're valuable and that we have personal significance and something to contribute. Like we have people whose sole job, this is comedians, sole job is to make people laugh. That is how amazing civilization is that it provides a place for everyone with every skill set to be valuable and appreciated. And so you don't need to feel awful about yourself. Whereas in a jungle situation, if you don't feel awful about yourself, or if you feel awful about yourself, you probably aren't fit for the jungle, and you would be eliminated, and that's the rule of the jungle. And so I'm very saddened when I see bullying, because it's no value. It's no value in a civilized society, and it's not helpful for civilization. Because bullying reduces a person's resilience. Now, again, this is dopamine. It reduces their dopamine. And what that means is that they're not as productive. Because you need dopamine to be motivated to get going. So dopamine is pretty interesting, because you can feel miserable and frightened or angry or something like that. But the dopamine kind of makes you resilient. So no matter how, fearful you might be of something, you can push through it and keep working. So you can be miserable and still working really hard, and that's part of the property of having this belief that you are of value, that you'd get this quality of resilience in your life and being able to deal with hardships. Bullying takes that away. That makes people who could be very strong very weak. And that if you have a large segment of the population who do not believe themselves to be worthwhile or valuable, then you have a large segment of the population who don't achieve nearly as much as they could. They don't achieve their full potential. And when people aren't achieving their full potential, the whole society suffers, because we lose their productivity, we lose their genius, and we have a much more impoverished life. And it can be difficult to see. I mean, because you can't see what you don't have. But when you look at how bullying can destroy a person who is otherwise quite talented, you get an idea that we are missing out on an awful lot from tolerating bullying. Because we're missing out on all those talented people who'd otherwise be contributing quite a lot. Now, the reason why this has all come to mind is that the last couple of weeks, 2020 being that crazy year with coronavirus and all that, but now we have like protests, and I understand there's a history of slavery and stuff like that in America, but like I live in Australia, and which, mind you, a lot of people seem to think that I'm British. I don't know about how my accent might sound to other people, but a lot of people have said that I speak with a British accent, and they kind of assumed that I was British, but no, I'm Australian. Yeah, we don't have that history here. We have a different history with the indigenous people here. But we've been having Black Lives Matter protests here in Australia. And it's really bothersome to me for a number of reasons, because they always have these big accusations about like white racism, the white people are so awful, and they never take into account how the white people in Australia came to Australia, when they came to Australia, where they came from to come to Australia, and what their ancestors actually did in Australia. I mean, instead, we're all treated like we're just one amorphous blob. We're all the same. We all have the same experience and background, and we all came from the same place, and we're all equally guilty. Or bad people. Toxic is a word that comes up. And it's I'm just like that it seems awfully similar to the kind of bullying I've seen in schools and workplaces and relationships. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like you're trying to push these beliefs onto people, and if they believe this thing, they buy into it, and they go, yeah, I'm a really awful person, blah blah blah, and that gives the bully a great sense of like vindication, that yes, I am better than you. And it's not about like money, because like lots of money is thrown at them, and lots of apologies. We've made so many apologies here, and so many handouts, and so many compromises, and it's never enough. They just keep coming back, and they keep escalating the accusations against us, and it's really quite bothersome, because this is bullying on a large scale, a national scale, and what really got me was this comment last week at the Black Lives Matter protest here, is that they said that Australia has to come to terms with our history of slavery. Now, Australia never had chattel slavery, ever. That never happened here. And at first I was happy to just dismiss it as being, oh my gosh, these are just ignorant people who don't know anything about the history of my country, and they're just trying to virtue signal. I was surprised to find that apparently there were 64,000 indentured servants, mostly from India, China, and some Pacific islands, that existed in Australia for about 60 years, and that ended in 1904. And they're calling that indentured servitude slavery. Now, this immediately struck me as a double standard, because for centuries, particularly the Irish and a lot of other white people were in indentured servitude, particularly in the United States. In fact, a lot more indentured servants went to the United States than blacks in the entire Atlantic slave trade ever. And so if they're going to call indentured servitude slavery, then they have to acknowledge that the Irish had it worse than the blacks in that sense. Now, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that if they're going to call indentured servitude slavery, they have to be fair and say it applies equally in both directions. Now, I think chattel slavery is a lot worse. Well, I don't know, a lot worse. I mean, indentured servitude is pretty bad, especially when the option the Irish often had was, you could starve to death, or you could sign your life away into indentured servitude on the other side of the planet. They're both pretty awful. I'd say that chattel slavery was worse, because it didn't have a chance to escape, but they're still really horrible. And the other thing that really got me is like I'm like 7/8 generation Australian, and I've got ancestors that came here as convicts. And they never talk about that. Like the convicts, there were 162,000 convicts that came to Australia, and they were slaves. They were absolute slaves. Now, people will say, oh, but they're convicts, so they're criminals. And there's a lot of things wrong with this. This is just not true. This is one of those myths that, again, the government kind of pushes these myths because they don't want to have to acknowledge the truth and acknowledge what actually happened. So the crime, well, first of all, just a common sense thing, just a purely philosophical, logical point of common sense. If you don't establish a new colony out of murderers, rapists, and thieves, you don't do that. That's madness. Because you are just going to create this huge enemy and problem for for yourself and the rest of humanity. You're basically empowering a massive criminal organization or conspiracy if you were to ship all those kind of people to an island. And surprise, surprise, murderers, rapists, thieves, they generally weren't the people being sent. Or if they stole a loaf of bread, that they might be getting there, but they weren't rapists and murderers being sent to Australia. No, a lot of the people who were sent to Australia committed crimes like swearing in public nudity, and political crimes. And the two big political crimes were, one, if you criticised how the Irish Catholics were treated in Ireland, you would be sentenced to transportation to Australia. And that if you're an English person who just had a conscience and said, look, I don't think we're treating the Irish Catholics very well, bam, onto a ship, transported to Australia. The other major political crime that people were committing was failure to report homosexual activity. So if you knew someone who was engaged in homosexual activity, you weren't yourself, because if you were, you would have been executed for homosexuality at the time. But if you knew someone who was in a homosexual relationship and you didn't report that to the authorities, that was a crime that they would send you to Australia for. And as a consequence, many of the convicts that came here in chains to Australia were celloists, violinists, composers, they were sculptors, basically painters, fine artists. They were put in chains and sent here for failure to report homosexual activity. So those are the people, the convicts, that founded this country that I'm descended from. That's horrible. I should be really ashamed of that. Now, they were slaves. And if you look at the ruins of these early settlements, they were living in horrendous conditions. And they were all white. And you never hear about this. It's never talked about, the crimes of the British government. I mean, of course, because if we had like some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Australia to look in the convicts and how they were treated, we would have to very much criticize the British government and how they treated us. And that's not politically expedient, so we don't have that conversation. But, you know, it might actually be worth having that conversation at some point as a country to address that. But yeah, that was slavery, and yeah, no, doesn't come up, and it's never pointed out, well, how come they don't have intergenerational trauma from that? Well, other groups apparently do have intergenerational trauma. It's not a good argument, and it just comes across as being, they're only saying this, they're only trying to put people down because they're white, and that's bullying. That's and it's quite mean. And so to kind of conclude this video, I want to talk about how one should respond to bullying. And I think there are two things you really need to do. Now, the first one is probably the most important one, and that's self-heal, because if you are being bullied or you feel bullied, that can only work if you actually believe that you are somehow inferior or weak or guilty or something, that you don't deserve to live a life like other people do, that you have less personal significance. And you are here talking to a therapist or a friend can really help you about this. Talk about why you don't feel that you deserve to be happy, why you don't feel that you have as much importance or right to be alive as other people. That's a big psychological burden to carry, and it's probably dragging you down because people carry those beliefs in their lives like a millstone around their neck. It really stops them from being motivated and productive and being as happy as other people. And finding self-acceptance, compassion, and answers to why you think that way and feel that way is very important, very healing. And that applies to the bullies themselves. They need compassion too. And the second thing is you've got to learn to discourage people from bullying you. And one does this by being yourself, but more so. And that's part of the reason why I got the flag. So I was told that I should be ashamed to be Australian. And I thought, oh my God, how dare you tell me how I should feel and how I should think about myself for my identity. And my reaction is like, well, if I should be ashamed of my country, of being Australian, then my only reaction to that should be to be more proud, more patriotic, and love my country even more. And so I thought, I'll put a flag up there to let them know that, the more you tell me I should be ashamed of myself, the prouder I'll feel about it. And you can do this in other ways, like if a bully tells you that you're stupid, tell them, but my ignorance just brings me so much bliss. Or say, if someone says you're lazy and just like, oh, sorry, I can't be bothered listening to you. I need another nap. Or another one might be someone says that, oh, you're ugly. And you're like, oh, thank you. I've been working on this Halloween costume all year. Now, when you do these things to a bully, when you be yourself but more so, what you are showing is that you accept yourself. You accept yourself for who you are, and you're fine with it. And what's more, you expose the bully to how inadequate they feel, because they look at you and go, oh my gosh, you're these things, but you don't care, you're happy, you still feel that your life is valuable and has meaning, that you have a place in the world. And it makes it very clear to the bully that they don't feel that, they're missing that, they're lacking that, they don't have the things that they want, that you have that they want, especially when you say, I'm happy being me. And I'm happy to be me more so, because I'm not going to let you trick me into doubting myself, attacking myself, and getting harsh on myself. The bully will respond to that like kryptonite. They're like, like vampire with sunlight. Crucifix, I can't take it. And they'll leave you alone. And so they're the two things that I think one should respond to a bully. I don't think it's helpful to get like violent and aggressive with the bully, because ultimately they are damaged people themselves, and they need that. They need love and compassion. Now, if you're being victimized by a bully, you're not the person to give them love and compassion. That's not your place. Don't try, because if you try to do that, the bully just sees you as being a sucker, basically, and they will take that compassion and they will beat you to death with it. The bully has to acknowledge that they need these things, or they need help, and generally, if the person they're attacking is the person who's least qualified to actually make that difference in their life, and they need to go to somebody else to talk to about that. I I just want to mention a few other things. Is that one that really got me was these Black Lives Matter people. I don't even know why they're in Australia, but they're here. Were telling me that that I should be embarrassed to be proud of being Australian. That it's irrational to love your country just because you were born here. And I just want to point out to them that's not true. Like the fact that they exist and they're here in Australia, and a lot of them grew up and born here, proves that you don't have to love your country. It's not compulsory. You can choose. Now, the interesting thing is that if you're Australian, you can choose. You can choose to love your country or not here. So it is a choice. It's free. It's a free country in that sense. But if you lived in China or North Korea or the former Soviet Union, you said, I hate my country. This country's disgusting. It's immoral. It's wrong. It's racist and awful. I hate everything to do with this country. You will not last long at all because you are not allowed to not love your country in those countries. And that is part of the reason why I think my country is a lot better than those countries, and why I think I'm entitled to say that I really love my country and I'm happy to be Australian. Anyway, I hope that gives you lots of food for thought, and until next time, per spera ad astra.